Thanks for joining us, Paul. So this is Paul Conn, and he's the president of Global Capital Markets at Computershare. Tell us a bit about your role at Computershare and what you actually do there.
Okay, so I head the Global Capital Markets group at Computershare. It's quite a wide-ranging role, looking at providing solutions to our clients and their investors, looking at major market structure challenges and changes, and looking at new commercial opportunities. So I run a relatively small group, but people distributed all around the world, including in Australia and Europe, UK, US, etc.
So let's get kicked off with the questions, because we've got many different questions that came from the community. And probably the most popular question of all that I can't really avoid asking is, what is the maximum price that you can actually sell a share for through Computershare themselves?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I know it's created a lot of chatter amongst the community on Reddit, and we've also seen a lot of traffic on Twitter. There's really two parts to that. The first part is, what's the trade consideration? What's the maximum value of an order that you can put on? And then the second part of it really relates to, what's the maximum limit price of any transaction you can put onto our platform. Taking the first one first, you will have seen from our FAQ that we communicated that once you move over $1 million trade consideration, we'd like to receive the order in writing. That's our very standard terms and conditions. In actual fact, people can go onto our web-based platform and put an order on for $1 million of value. Nothing stopping them putting another on. They can put many orders on throughout the day, so they can transact electronically. They're not really capped at $1 million where they need to then submit to writing. So hopefully that will put a lot of your audience at ease straight away. As it relates to the second point, what's the maximum limit order you can put on a particular transaction? It's just under $250,000, so it's a very high price. Don't ask me all the ins and outs of how you get to that, because I rely on our kind of technical team on that. But it's something that we've seen a lot of discussion around, and we'll just keep monitoring whether or not that needs to increase.
Okay, so when you say if it does need to increase, you're alluding to the fact that you can increase it if it does actually eventuate in that scenario.
Yeah, we're looking at how long it will take to actually do the increase. Something we're very conscious of. I don't want to go into specifics of any particular share price of any particular company and what movements might take when, and what the catalyst for that is. But yeah, we're taking a look at that, because clearly people are making a lot of noise about that. People can, of course, always be directly registered on our books and sell through any broker. So you're not captive to Computershare if you bring your shares into direct registration. I'm sure we'll get into that as we move through.
Yeah, great, good to know. So moving on to the next part, which is probably the second most asked question, is IRAs. And the main thing is, can people actually direct register their IRA shares?
Yeah, there's a few different parts to this. None of these questions are simple one word yes no. So I don't think there's any kind of system reason why someone couldn't remove shares from an IRA and put the shares on the register in their own name, at least not from a market and transfer mechanism perspective. There may be tax consequences of doing that, and an investor should talk to their own financial advisor about what the implications of doing that are. As you know, Computershare is a transfer agent, and we do a number of other things, but we're not financial advisors, and we don't give financial advice. So I don't think there's any systematic impediment to do that. Some of our clients will allow an IRA registration on their own books that we administer for them. So it really needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so yeah, okay, very much case-by-case, that's fair enough. And is Computershare considering offering any custodian services for IRA?
Not at this moment in time. I mean, we're always looking for new commercial opportunities. That's kind of just hardwired into our DNA. I mean, we can see there's lots of questions. It's not clear whether Computershare needs to be an IRA provider in order to solve this particular issue. So not at this particular moment in time.
Okay, fair enough. That makes sense. So moving over to, more so transferring from brokers and buying shares. The past month or so, people have been looking into the DTCC and how the direct registration system actually works. Could you help us understand what the process is from the start when someone requests a direct registration through to the actual shares landing in their Computershare account?
Sure. Okay. Well, let me try and do that by first answering the piece that's really directly under our control, and that is when DTC initiates an electronic transfer on behalf of one of its broker or bank participants to register shares on the Computershare platform in the name of an investor. Where that occurs, it happens, it can happen on a daily basis. We will record the investor's name on the register and issue a statement to evidence that registration, generally on the next working day. So the process between DTC and Computershare, and indeed the broker DTC and Computershare, is very fast. As for when the investor first communicates to the broker and the broker puts that transaction into the DTC system, we have really no visibility of that whatsoever. So that's something we really don't have any control over. That may take a few days for a broker to give effect to that transaction. We're seeing some chatter that there are some extended periods, but that's really a broker-client matter that we just can't measure.
Okay, that makes sense. And to clarify, do you actually know if the shares are removed from the DTC's books?
So when one of these DRS transfers occurs, so when it's coming out of the DTC system into an individual's name, we apply this double entry accounting process. So in order to put Jack's name on the register for a share, we need to take one share away from CD & Co, which is DTC's nominee. So we are taking the share out of DTC's name, as it were, on the register. So in that respect, the register's always kept in balance with the issuer's share capital.
So the community is pretty big on hypotheticals, and there's a lot of interest regarding direct registering shares on stocks that have been, naked shorted, creating what's known as synthetic shares. So is it possible to direct register more shares than are available than the public float of a company?
Okay, there's a couple of different concepts in there, and I maybe just park to one side the comment around synthetic shares and not try to dodge that. I'll come back to that in the second part of the comment. So as it relates to can we register more shares, the answer to that really is no, for the reasons that I just set out. In order to put your name on the register, we need to take a real share off CD & Co on the register. So that's how the register's always kept in balance. When you talk about synthetics and concerns that people have around short selling, that's really a step removed from Computershare and the role of the transfer agent. That's really what's happening behind the scenes of the DTC and the way in which they hold shares in participant accounts, being banks or brokers, and in turn how each of those banks and brokers hold accounts for individual investors. That's not a set of distributed records that's visible, unfortunately, to the issuer or its agent.
Okay, gotcha. So it's not really related to Computershare in that essence.
Well, I think it's all related because these are investors in companies that we are the agent for. So we have an indirect interest in it, but I wouldn't say we're the cause of it.
Yeah, definitely not the cause. And is it your responsibility to look after that as the transfer agent for a given company, or is it more?
It's not really our responsibility to look after it because we often don't know it's happening, and that's one of the challenges that I think many people have in terms of understanding what's going on here. We're talking about a distributed set of records that actually no individual in the marketplace has the entire access to. So it's not something that's actually our responsibility. We're responsible for monitoring the shares that are on the register. I think really what DTC needs is, it needs to ensure that its records balance with its participant records, and each of the banks and brokers need to ensure that their records account for their customer assets. And, they have net positions and longs and shorts and so on. But that's really beyond the scope of what Computershare is responsible for.
So if direct registering does stop due to, say, all shares being actually registered, what happens to those people who maybe haven't registered their shares yet but still want to, with shares that are held at their brokers? Is it just cutting them off and saying, hey, no, everything's been registered already, so we can't do that?
Yeah, look, that is a really, really good question. I think it is at this moment in time a hypothetical, but it's a very, very important hypothetical. So I think it's right for people to ask. I mean, it's really, I think, unprecedented in a public company sense where the company is transacting on the marketplace. So I'm sure at that trigger point, or even shortly before that trigger point, there will be discussions amongst the company, the exchange, the DTC, to talk through what the ramifications of that outcome really ought to be.
Okay, that's very interesting. So the conversation will be very much noted internally and basically discussed between parties who have an interest in this.
Well, I think the regulatory organizations would have a look at that, because, I mean, if I understand your hypothetical correctly, you're saying if every share is registered on the books of the company, which it is today because one of the large shareholders is CD, but if CD goes to zero and there are third parties that hold every issued share, I think your question is, what is the status then of anyone who's got a share in their brokerage or bank account, and what happens to trading? And, that'll be an interesting set of discussions if and when we get there.
Yeah. Okay. So this comes back to, as retail investors of record, how are we able to know how much stock we've collectively registered? Is there anywhere we can actually inquire to find this information? Is it your responsibility, or is it, again, the company's responsibility?
So we have two ways of reporting ownership. The first is to the public company itself, our client. The client has online access to the entire issued capital that we're recording and in effect administering on their behalf as agent. And each investor has access to their own portion of the register, their own account or holding on the register. It's a little bit like a bank account. You go online to check your cash in your bank, you can see your cash, but you can't see any other kind of subset of like-minded people. And that, I think, is what a lot of people are trying to grapple with, just how to do that when that information's not in the public domain.
Yeah, that's right. I think I think it's natural that humans want to kind of get certainty on these things by understanding the data. But from your side, it sounds like it's not really Computershare's side or responsibility to do that, and it's more so the company's.
I mean, look, just balancing those 2 points up, we act as the company's agent, so we can't just automatically decide to publish segments of the data, even if there is interest in it. I think the company might need to consider from time to time if it should do that, or maybe even a regulator may suggest to the company that it might be a good order thing to do to keep people fully informed, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So moving on to brokers, in terms of the actual direct registering process, many people have observed that there's broker pushback when it comes to transferring shares. A prime example could be Etoro, as of recent, who've straight up refused to direct register shares for their customers who've purchased them. So in these instances where there is broker pushback, is there any route retail customers can take where we can escalate it or actually force brokers to direct register the shares?
Okay, well, you kind of lasered in on a real specific there, and I think there's a more general, maybe if I just step back and just talk about an investor that's got an account with a broker, let's say a US broker that happens to be a DTC participant, should be able to get a transfer into DRS form so the investor can hold their shares in their own right. That shouldn't be an onerous process. The broker may have many requests coming in simultaneously, so things might take a bit longer than they might otherwise would, but there shouldn't be extended delays. When you start to talk about online brokers, an online broker, let's say in Europe or down in Australia, it really gets down to how that broker is holding shares in custody, because the underlying shares generally would be in the DTC. So international broker usually would have a custodian arrangement with a DTC participant, or there might be 2 or 3 parties in the chain. So ultimately, the length of time it takes will get down to how simple or complex that holding structure is and how many people are in the chain. There may be some international brokers that just don't have the functionality to do this type of transaction because they never envisaged that it would ever be needed. And obviously the issue that I think people are grappling with, does the broker always have the shares that I want to transfer? That's really an issue that the client and the broker need to work through.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of would you actually suggest, basically continuing pushing our efforts as retail to encourage brokers like this to actually invest in the processes? Because to me, it seems like direct registering your shares, it shouldn't be the brokers saying no and blocking us off. They should be able to provide this option.
Yeah, look, that is a good question. I think the situations that we're seeing in the marketplace now are kind of throwing up some unusual situations, right? Not situations that occur in every stock every day of the week. So it's not unreasonable for a client to be asking their broker why they can't do it. And if it's a lack of functionality, why the broker doesn't have the functionality. I mean, we've seen situations, I'm now just reading things that have been reported in your forums, that some investors, some customers have actually changed their broker in order to get a broker-to-broker transfer of the shares, then to ask the third-party broker to DRS the shares into Computershare. So, one of the things I'm really amazed about is the way in which information is being, there's clearly a thirst for information in the community, and how people are collaborating by sharing information and really becoming quite inventive in terms of how they put these transactions together to ultimately get onto the register. But there's no single silver bullet here. You need to really talk to your broker and try and understand why there's some reluctance to transfer. And ultimately, an extreme situation would be to talk to the regulator to see why that's the case. Because we're talking about in all cases here financial organizations that are regulated in each of these markets.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, is people were kind of confused about seeing fractional shares on your platform, and that you actually display them, and it rightfully raised some eyebrows, as a few people assumed that only one person can claim ownership to a single share certificate, and fractional shares is something that's kind of a broker thing in terms of how they purchase it, etc. So how do fractional shares actually work when it comes to Computershare and ownership? Do I share ownership with someone else if I have a fractional share?
Okay, well, let me try and answer that. There's a few different parts to this. So if we're talking about the direct registration system and how shares are recorded in individual investors' names on the register, only whole shares are transferred either from the DTC into the investor's name or from the investor's name back into the DTC. So we're always talking about whole shares there. Fractional shares can come about through the direct stock purchase plan that we operate, where we buy shares and record them in the investors' names. In that situation, we have the ability to offer fractional entitlement to shares, and those shares can at any point in time be moved from the purchase plan into the direct registration system, so they can be separated out as well.
So essentially, when it comes to share ownership with the register itself, you don't actually own that fractional share.
So when you look into our system, you'll see your total number of shares. It may be made up of a book position and a DRS position. The DRS position you own absolutely unfettered in your own name. The shares that are in the plan represent a pool that we operate on behalf of the investors. Those shares can be withdrawn and put into the other part of the account at any particular moment in time. So you can buy shares through the plan. You can immediately transfer them from the plan into the DRS portion of the holding.
So when it comes to buying shares through Computershare, it's been theorized that the broker places large orders on the exchange that essentially represent a cumulative amount of buy orders from yourself in Computershare. Do your brokers lodge these orders on the exchange when they come through, or do they wait and accumulate them and then wait to execute them as a batch order?
So when we're talking about purchasing, we purchase within a batch. So we will accumulate orders through a 24-hour period, and we will lodge that aggregate order with the broker that acts on our behalf, just after when the market opens, and we leave it with the broker to determine how to work that order through the marketplace. So that will be driven by how big is the order, how liquid is the stock. We're always looking for our broker to execute these trades on lit exchanges, so on the markets.
Okay, and you say lit exchanges, are you referring to specific exchanges? Like, do they have to execute on NYSE or Nasdaq, etc.?
They have to abide by the national best bid and offer, so that's a rule that binds. So they've always got to look at best execution, but we're looking for them to execute these transactions on the NYSE or the Nasdaq, not in dark pools. I think, just to be clear, if that's where you were heading.
Yeah, you're right. So they have to adhere to the MBBO. Okay, that makes sense. So if a company is listed on NYSE, they don't have to purchase those shares through NYSE themselves.
The company might be listed on NYSE, but it will trade on a number of different venues. Okay.
All right, that makes sense. Like retail are used to relatively quick order execution, so I think that was kind of a surprise when there was batched together. As people
Jack, sorry, maybe if I can just jump in and without being rude.
Yeah.
That's how the purchasing works. If you want to sell securities, you've got the option of doing a real-time transaction with us through the web, or selling into a batch and going through a batch process, or you can sell through your own broker. So there's lots of opportunities for you and choice available to you when you're selling. The point that I made earlier was really that's how we accumulate the shares when we're buying shares through the plan. But some parties might say, well, I'm going to execute my order in real time to purchase the shares through a broker, and then have the broker DRS the shares into Computershare. So there's plenty of choice available to people.
Yeah, we've definitely seen people do that in terms of buying through broker and then DRSing again. So that makes sense.
And then when you're selling it, you can sell real time through us. When you are doing a real time trade through us, the turnaround time can be very, very quick. Assuming there's a counterparty in the market to buy the shares that our broker is selling on behalf of you all.
Okay, so we execute on Computershare, which then sends it to their broker, which will then execute it on the market.
And we use highly integrated systems to do that. We're not sending carrier pigeons with pieces of paper saying, please run to the floor of the stock exchange and execute sale of shares. So it's modern and pretty fast.
I think you'll catch some flack for that analogy of carrier pigeons with the way that you send mail out at the moment.
Oh, well, you can come back to that. Okay.
Yeah,
I walked into that one.
So I'll just touch back onto that point again regarding selling. So is there a major difference between selling through Computershare, who execute through that broker, versus transferring out of Computershare to your broker and selling through there? Surely there'd be a delay because of that second option, right?
Well, let me just address that. Maybe dig in a little bit more to
Yeah.
selling through Computershare. So, I've explained that through Computershare, you have the ability to elect to do a real-time transaction through our electronic system, which is connected to our broker's electronic system. So that can go straight through into the marketplace. If that order trades, the confirmation will come straight through. So actually selling through Computershare can be very, very fast and effective if there's a market in the securities, and that round trip can be fast. If you're selling through a batch, the process of executing part of that batch obviously then is it slows down, because we do that once a day, and small positions can typically go into a batch. When I referred to the fact that people can transfer their shares through DRS back to their broker, or more accurately, their broker can request the transfer of shares through DRS back from, let's say, Jack's name into his broker's name. That potentially might give you some delay in executing your order through your online broker. Some brokers may be prepared to, depending on the individual and their arrangement with their own broker. If you've got these particular shares and they know you've got them, they may allow you to execute straight away. Now, when they've got highly mechanistic platforms that everything's driven by the internet, they will probably want those shares to land in your account before you can put the order on their particular platform. It will differ, I would say, broker by broker and client by client, just depending on the commercial arrangement between the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So on the buying side of things, and you touched on this briefly before, when it comes to the direct stock program, I think. So when buying shares through the direct stock program, are those shares potentially being purchased from the company's authorized shares that aren't currently outstanding?
No, those shares are purchased on market. So we purchase them through the market, and then we bring them into the plan. And once they're in the plan, you as an investor can say, I want to take them out of the plan and put them in pure DRS form, or you're happy to leave them in the plan. That choice is yours. And that's the difference between the fractional component and the whole shares component. The whole shares relates to shares held through DRS, and fractions relate to any component you may have in the plan.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification. So moving on to dividends, which is probably the most widely discussed topic when it comes to our community. When Computershare came to light, everyone started to ask themselves how an NFT or a special dividend would be handled. And I'm aware that you've coordinated this before with other clients to make so how do you make sure that you have the capability to support blockchain-based dividends? And I'm curious what the process was historically for actually handling that.
Okay, well, I mean, historically, many of our clients pay dividends. They pay cash dividends. They offer stock alternatives, dividend reinvestment plans. That's been kind of quite routine, and those arrangements in place in many of the markets we operate in around the world. In the last few years, we've started to see some clients ask if we could provide dividends through less traditional means. And initially here, I'm talking about one particular party that came to us and said, could we pay the dividend through fractional gold entitlements where gold is secured in a particular vault? We sat with that client and worked through the mechanics of that to see whether that was cost effective for them to do that at scale. That's an example of potential demand. More recently, we've had people ask whether we can pay dividends in crypto. We have a couple of private company, like unlisted clients, that have asked us to pay dividends in US dollars and offer their shareholders the ability to take a transfer of, let's say in this particular case, it was Bitcoin. So we were crediting Bitcoin to wallets. One of our clients, and this is in the public domain, so I think I can mention it, Overstock was involved in distributing a dividend through its blockchain, and we have for a number of years now had the ability to connect a blockchain to our registry platform so that we can credit the security, if it in fact is a security, to the ledger.
Okay, so when it comes to that, in terms of actually receiving it, you essentially credit it and recognize it on the user's account.
Yes, yeah. Look, a lot of this gets down to what scale does it need to operate at, and what is the nature of the dividend? Is it a security itself at law, or is it not a security and it's some form of perk? And depending on whether it's a perk or a security, might influence how it has to be physically distributed to the owners of the company. But that's where we need to, we need to just sit with the client and understand exactly how they want the dividend to be structured, and then we'll run through with them the logistics of how we get it from them to their particular shareholders. I mean, that's what we specialize in. And if it happens to be a blockchain-based entitlement, we'll work with them to work out how we can get all of the wallet addresses to affect the credits of if it's crypto or if it's some other type of digital asset into the right party's hands. Where I think being on the register is clearly an advantage there, because there are no intermediaries sitting really between the issuing company and the investor. Computershare's role is really that of an agent acting for the issuer. Where there's an entitlement that has some real monetary value, of course, people that are holding their shares through banks and brokers will want to take receipt of that entitlement. And that's where some of the complexities come in. Okay. It's kind of hypothetical without a specific example to look at, but I'd be happy to kind of dig into this some other time, once.
That sounds like a good session. Big hypothetical session where we just
we love stuff like this. I mean, this is why we get out of bed in the morning. It's like when there are unique kind of situations, clients want to do things.
Yeah, fantastic. So we'll move on from dividends, because it sounds like essentially you will consult with the company to essentially execute whatever they're trying to do. And I think that's enough reassurance for people in terms of like, that is the service you provide, which makes sense. Moving on to the international side, and I know we've only got, how long left now? Maybe 10 minutes?
Well, maybe 10 minutes, we're good.
Yeah. So onto the international side, we've got people who are part of our community from all over the world. And they're curious, you offer certain services based in the US, but are you also planning to offer them internationally as well, such as the purchasing of stocks directly?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we've probably never had as much attention as we're getting just at the moment from people all around the world that want to focus on a particular narrow range of securities. So it's interesting for us to try and understand what the demand is. We are not a broker, we're a transfer agent. So there are some restrictions in terms of what services we can offer in which jurisdiction. So that's an issue that we're taking a look at this moment in time. But yeah, we're always looking for opportunities to broaden our ability to service corporations' international shareholder base. When you have a dual listed company, for example, we're actually running registers in multiple countries, and each country registers connected to the stock market infrastructure in each country. In many of the situations in the US is the only place of formal listing, and therefore investors around the world who are working with local brokers around the world, those brokers are in turn working with people based in the US. So you have a different holding structure, and our ability to service those international investors is not quite as flexible as when you have the securities listed in multiple markets.
And touching on the account creation process specifically, because I think that's kind of been a pretty big problem in terms of the funnel. So are you looking at making that faster for international customers? Because right now you got to wait and you're expecting an email to come through to get to then log into your CS account. Are you looking to make that process faster and using email instead?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We're always looking at that, and international clients are not being particularly prejudiced here. This is a process from a risk management perspective where we have opened the account on the platform, and then mailed the PIN to the investor. Now, many people are reminding us that there are other ways of doing multi-factor authentication. We're often looking at that. We'd like to make the process faster. We have recently in the Australian market introduced two-factor authentication for certain processes, and we're keen to see that to be ported into different markets around the world, including the US. So it's really balancing off efficiency against risk management. But we've heard everyone loud and clear. We're not happy if it takes someone 3 or 4 weeks to get a PIN through the international mail. So we've got people looking at that right now.
Awesome, fantastic. I think people will be very happy to hear that. In terms
well,
of
they'll be happy once we switch something else on that gives them instant access. But yeah, we hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. So people are also interested in the type of capabilities that Computershare offers their customers. By customers, I mean the companies that work with you and that choose you to be their transfer agent. Do companies commonly opt in for the feature that you provide that allows for live counts of registered shares?
Sorry, Jack, could you just mention just the last part again? I just missed the last 2 or 3 words, please.
Yeah, no worries. So do companies commonly opt in for the feature that you provide to them, which is it allows for looking at a live count of registered shares?
Right, okay, I understand. So all of our registry or transfer agency clients have the online access into our platform, and most companies will take that. It's kind of part of a standard package that's offered. So that is immediate in terms of online access to the records that are on the register at that point in time. So when you use the term live, it to me implies, can they actually get a dynamic count of shares that are transferring? Now, where the record's being transferred on our books, they would see that in real time as they peer into our platform. But they don't have the ability, nor do we provide the service, to see the real-time transfer of securities in beneficial ownership form within the DTC. There are some parties that provide or try to provide that type of, so no one really has access to that information. Only the DTC knows what shares are being transferred between particular participants, and only brokers or banks know which of their customer accounts are being impacted by that. So no one really has the ability to kind of dip in real time and tell you what's actually being transferred.
We'll wrap it up there for today. And I just wanted to say thanks for joining us. And hopefully we can get maybe a part 2 along the way, depending on if we have any follow-up questions.
Yeah, we're happy to do a part 2. We know you're trying to cover a lot of ground. And when I was working with Yin and Joe, it was clear that we might struggle to get it all done in 45 minutes. We're very happy to do a part 2 with you, but I'm sure whenever you release this, it will generate a whole bunch of other questions, and we'll pick that up thereafter.
Yeah,
we're happy to do a part 2.
Sure it will.
I'm sure it will.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks for your time again, Paul. We can wrap it up there.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great chat.